G'day Internet. With me here is an absolutely monumental project for purpose-built moto. Our first collaboration with Royal Enfield. They got in touch with us last year and sent us out a Super Meteor 650, one of their latest releases in the 650 twin range. We've taken that project and put our touch to it with no holds barred. They gave us complete creative freedom. So today I'm going to go through with you piece by piece on how exactly we made this bike happen. I'm Tom Gilroy and you're in the Purpose Built Moto Garage for another build rundown. Now, if you're familiar with the Super Meteor 650, you'll know just how drastic the modifications are on this machine. Once we started, those mods and changes came thick and fast, and we ended up with a completely different motorcycle. Not much was salvaged from the old project, but what we did save was that twin engine and a few little bits and pieces of the frame. We wanted to take the opportunity to hand make as much of this motorcycle as possible because we could go that far and do that on this project. Given creative freedom, we really wanted to stretch our legs and try some new ideas. What I'm going to run you through now is a few bits and pieces, probably on the fabrication, and we'll start on the front end. An idea that I'd had floating around for a little while was to try and use a 23-inch front wheel. I really love the 21/19 setup on some of my other choppers that you would have seen, but the 23 just gives that really bold look and has a bit more of a sort of cartoony feel to it, that sort of huge oversized wheel on the front of this bike. And being a mid-sized cruiser, it really stands out. So I wanted to make that a real feature of the front end, that coupled with our handmade girder. Taking inspiration from some of the historical Royal Enfield models, including the Flying Flea, which is one of my absolute favorite historical Enfield models. Those things were made during the war and parachuted into the battlefield, which is an epic backstory, but the bike itself, it just looks really great. They have a super simple style because they were made for absolute bare bones functionality. So we've taken that idea, added our own touch to it, and hand fabricated this girder. We've used a mix of sizes in chromoly tube, hand machined all of the spigots for the front axle plate. You've got your cross member there on the bottom of the shock absorber mount, and then also the top bar that runs across for the linkages to the dog bones, which sort of takes you back onto your triple clamp setup. So everything you see here was completely handmade. We've recently got some new machinery in the shop and we really put it to the test and sort of found our feet with that, making these parts and then making everything function as well. Now, apart from being tied to the historical significance that we wanted to sort of leverage on for this project, I really wanted to test myself and make one of these because it's something that I hadn't done before. A girder fork on the front end, I feel like gives you a really good opportunity to make some nice intricate details. On a standard front end, you've got a set of triple clamps, you know, you can make some nice bar mounts or something like that. But on something like this, you can see all of the mechanisms working. There's no hidden anything. So you've got the dog bone linkages that have been made out of stainless steel, polished up. You have the bearings in there. We've been able to really detail this. So if you come in close on some of these details, these are sections here. So I've hand machined these sections. They're, you know, riddled with beautiful detail. And then these are actual brass detailing. So we've machined the parts, made some brass rings up and then clipped those on afterwards, welded them out and finished them on. So they're not just painted gold, these are actual brass parts that we've machined and then laid into the front end just to add that extra level of finish that we were going for. If you want to check out this front end in extreme detail, we do have another video coming out of the fabrication of this that was filmed during the build process, so you can go and check that out. We've used an FNA Cycles pancake headlight here, coupled with a mountain bike shock, which is a pretty common thing to use on these girder fork front ends, definitely not a new idea there. We've hand machined the top and bottom clamps and utilized that top clamp for our shock mount and also a really clean and tidy bar mount. Trying to minimize the amount of width that we wanted on this front end. We wanted to keep everything super nice and slim. Now, of course, with the custom girder fork, we've got a completely handmade custom brake setup. using a brake caliper from Discacchiati, Italy. I hope I said that right, I definitely didn't. We've found these beautiful little calipers that we've coupled there, designed our own front brake rotor and the rear brake rotor as well, so we could have nice matching rotors of our own design, and then linked that up with some custom hubs that we've made to suit the 23-inch front wheel. So the rims on this machine are actually a handmade set that come from a guy that deals with a lot of board track races and vintage Harley Davidson. I contacted him, gave him my specs, and he made me up these wheels specially for the project. I've actually got another set since then because I liked them so much. They're a really simple profile. They haven't got any lips or bellies. So if you get a really nice detail shot of that there, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. But they just don't make rims that look like that anymore. They're absolutely beautiful. Now, because this bike will end up being street ridden, we had to play the game with some functionality, of course. On the handlebars, we've custom made all of this bracketry. The handlebar profile here mimics a 1951 Royal Enfield that we've been restoring in the shop here. So it was really handy having that here as part of the process, so we could take inspiration from it, see how they did things and the way that the Royal Enfield was laid out, and then mimic that on the parts that we liked for our project. And I think this sort of handlebar is really era specific to that 40s and 50s era of motorcycle, which is what we sort of wanted to recreate that feeling of over this machine. We're running a couple of purpose-built Moto 2-button switches here, so we have the functionality on the handlebars, and then the front brake is actuated by a cable that runs underneath the tank to where the front brake master cylinder is. All of this gear is custom tech, really awesome stuff. So they make these beautiful inverted levers which we've utilized, and then some great custom master cylinders as well. Carrying on with the fabrication work, a lot of the mess has been removed from the front here. So the standard machine, you have your exhausts running out, they actually run out quite far. We had to push those back to get the profile right with our oversized front wheel here, and then we had to deal with an oil cooler as well. What we've done, instead of running the factory oil cooler, is delete that and rebuild the frame here. So we've completely rebuilt the frame neck, removed a lot of the plating so we could really thin that profile out. Again, we really wanted to make this bike slim over the top. So we've rebuilt the engine brackets that mount onto the front here, and then put some new gusseting in. While we were doing this, the frame bars here were completely replaced too. Now the function of this, if you can make sense of these oil lines, we have a feed that comes in and pumps oil to the bottom of this frame rail. The oil fills up through the frame and then passes out the top back into the engine, sort of acting as a cooler. I mean, I won't say that it's gonna work anywhere near as good as the factory one, but it's better than just a straight bypass too. And as I said, I do wanna ride this bike once we get it on the street, so I wanted to make sure that we could ride it for a good amount of time, the thing wouldn't get too hot. So we have a bit of extra oil capacity there, and you know, we'll see. The proof will be when I get this thing out on the road for a good ride, how well that oil cooling works. The next port of call, once we had our front end sorted out, was to rebuild the swing arm. Again, we had a lot of frame back here. There was a twin shock setup, room and mounting and bracing enough for a pillion seat, none of that which we needed. So it was decided that we would completely cut the frame from the back of the tank rearward, and that would go in place of a monoshock conversion. So the swing arm was completely re-engineered from scratch. I actually have the old swing arm sitting upstairs. So I used that to get my measurements for the hub and the length and stuff like that. We did stretch it out a little bit so I could sit lower in the bike, but the the mounting on the pivot points and all the bar work, even the axle plates were made from scratch. So I designed the axle plates up. This is a bit of a design that I took from a Harley Davidson WLA. So they have these really nice dropout axle plates that I've copied here, and then so obviously like made them work for the Royal Enfield. So we've made all of this out of chromoly tube. Your chain adjuster setup has been included in here, obviously the fender mounts, and then the monoshock conversion. We had to rebuild this section of the backbone underneath the seat here that runs down to the rear engine mount, and then brace that in so it could take the monoshock mount. The detailing on the swing arm, obviously when you change something this much and on a bike like this, you are given license to make things more intricate, and you can put detail in where potentially there wouldn't be detail sometimes. So what I've decided to do, instead of just sort of trellising or bracing this swing arm with some nice round bar, I've actually made a stainless steel brace here. So this is all hand machined. We've got like a nice breakout piece to link both of the sides, and then that's been polished up and masked before the swing arm was painted. Just one of those things, like, you put so much time into something like that, but at the end of the day, those details, if you can add them, like I was talking about on the girder fork, all of the machining there and the detailing with the brass that we've put in on that, we want to make that same message continue from the front to the rear of this bike, and this piece on the swing arm was part of doing that. So the geometry and the stance of the bike, once this modification was completed, we stretched that out a little bit, obviously lowered the bike as far as we could with that, and then we could have that line to start to figure out the rest of our project. And this foundation would tell the story for the rest of the bike and let us develop the rest of the styling from there. So in the swing arm, we've got a custom built 19-inch rear wheel. We've used a Continental GT rear hub on this one, so they're slightly different to the Super Meteor, but they fit up pretty well, exactly the same. And then we've custom made our brake hanger here, again with a nice Dischiati brake caliper and a custom rotor. The tyre that we're using on the back here is a 4x19 Firestone, and then we've got a 23-inch Firestone on the front there. The rear shock that we're using is a custom built Nitron shock from Suspensions Are Us Australia. Those guys are really helpful in giving us a hand and working out the spring rates and stuff. So once we drop this bike off the table, sit on it, adjust your shocks up to where they need to be, and you know, the suspension movement that you get out of this thing and the spring rate was all bang on right from the start, which is a really good thing, to not have to go back and then adjust the suspension too much by changing springs and things like that when you get these bikes on the road. Now, before we get into talking about the details on our tail light here, I've got to give a big shout out to today's video sponsor, Makita Australia. Those guys have stood behind us for a long, long time now. We're super proud to be part of their team, using their tools. When you are going as crazy as we do on these projects, you really need tools to keep up. So if your toolbox is looking like it needs a bit of a birthday in terms of battery tools or power tools, make sure you go check out Makita. Now, as I said before, we wanted to make this bike insanely detailed. So when it came to the rear fender, I really wanted to make something that complemented the style of the bike, but had a few special touches as well. What we've gone with here is a really nice duck-lipped fender that I've had to cut and shut to fit, you know, super nice over the wheel. That in so far as, in fact, if you have the wheel out of alignment, it's like starting to rub. It's that, the fitment is that tight on this thing, but that's exactly what I wanted. So we've made this fender fit absolutely perfectly, and then started to make our fender struts. So I've machined up a couple of stays for our swing arm here, polished stainless steel, and then machined these bolt heads so they fit perfectly within that retainer at the top here as well. A lesson that we learnt recently when we were welding these fabrication bungs onto thin sheet metal is it's better to go with brazing, because you don't have to put as much heat into that thin sheet. So we've brazed these on there, finished them out nicely. That gives you a nice strong join, but it doesn't give you that heat that can weaken the mild steel. Something new that you might have noticed on the rear of this fender is our new fender lights. So this is a product that I've been working on for a very long time. These lights used to come on the front fenders of vintage Harley Davidsons. They also used to use them on 20s and 30s cars on the front fenders as sort of like marker lights at night, so you could see where the extremities of the car were. So guys back in the day used to take these lights, tint the lenses red, and use them as brake lights on their motorcycles. So I really like that idea, and there's nothing really out there, so you're hunting around online for these nice looking tail lights that you're paying like $500 or $600 for something that's busted and rusty or broken and corroded. So I wanted to take that styling, get inspired from that, and then make something of my own. These come with a base, a top, and a lens with an LED in the body. So you put these together, weld them onto your fender and finish it out. Obviously the base gets painted with the fender, and then you bolt it on top with a single wire that runs away, and then you can put a splitter in your electrics tray to get your tail and brake light functionality. So I reckon I've probably been working on this thing on and off for 2 years. We've obviously been super busy, but we've got it finally to the point where these things are about to come out. So if you're in need of one of these, get in touch with us and we'll send you one of our first ones off the line. Some other smaller details on this project. We've swung a plate mount off the side of the swing arm here. Don't get at me because I know it's not 100% legal. I don't want to hear it. I was never going to ruin my nice rear fender with a plate mounted off the top of it. So we've got a nice stainless steel plate mount here. Again, adding some detail in there just to make sure it fits with the rest of the motorcycle. Another one that I really liked on this bike was the velocity stacks that we made on the engine. So I went for a bit of a holiday. I like to take a bit of a break every year. My partner and I went over to Greece during the year and we hung out with the guys from DNA Filters. I was on my way to get a coffee one morning and I walked past a shop where I noticed the guy was metal spinning inside. If you've never seen that process before, it's a super interesting thing where they have a sort of it looks more like a timber lathe setup. So they clamp a big sheet of metal and then they use wheels and specialty tooling to shape it into tubular shapes. So you start with basically a big circle disc and then you shape that down into all sorts of shapes. This guy was actually making candle stands and chalices for all the local churches, but I stuck my head in the door and I pestered him, had a look at what he was doing, and then I went back the next day and he actually got me on the tools and we were I was learning a bit with him and then he was making these velocity stacks up. So they've come a long way to be on the bike here on the Gold Coast in Australia as they were made in this shop in Greece. But a super nice piece and like a bit of a personal story for me with this one because I was on a break and this guy was nice enough to take time out of his day, show me a few bits and pieces of his craft, and we sort of shared a couple of hours together and made these parts. So I knew exactly what I wanted, but I couldn't find them, and it was just by pure luck that I went past this guy's shop. So these are made out of 2mm brass, and then we've made the aluminium spigots here to fix them onto the throttle bodies on the Royal Enfield. So everything works nice. I've actually machined a stay up, so we've got gauze inside there to stop any sort of big chunks of debris or whatever going in there. Some of the other major parts of this motorcycle, the seat, because we've modified the backbone, is actually cantilevered off the rear of the frame. So the frame stops about here and then we've put a mild steel stay that runs towards the back of the seat that supports it just down the sort of centerline spine. This sort of acts as a really clean, sturdy way to mount your seat. But if you look at it as you were sitting here, you can't ever really see how it's mounted. You know where the frame ends, but for all intents and purposes, that seat is just floating in the air, which is what we wanted. So you create that nice line over the bike onto the rear fender. The tank was, again, another really crucial piece of this bike. As I've been mentioning through the course of this video, we really wanted to take inspiration from the back catalogue. What some of you guys might not know is Royal Enfield used to make the Super Meteor back in the 50s. It was a twin cylinder, it held a couple of world speed records. It was a really pinnacle motorcycle for them back in the day. So we went back, looked through the vintage Super Meteor designs, took that, applied it to the shape of our new motorcycle, and then we've got a new guy in the shop here, Cody, who's a really great sheet metal worker. He shaped up a buck and he got into making this tank, which has come out perfectly. The way that it sits over the engine, absolutely magic, and then that nice classic shape too. It's a very simple design, which, to be honest, I sort of like my stuff a little bit simpler. I think it's very easy to make things overcomplicated and add, too much design flair on pieces like that. So I was really happy to sort of keep things simple and really carry that vintage Royal Enfield style through. So again, the tank has come out ultra nice, the way that it sits on the frame, and we've just got a pivot mount here that also doubles. That's sort of like where our seat bracing is, and then a mount here. A challenge with this one was really tough to get the EFI pump in there. The thing is probably about that big, the pump base. So on a tank this small, it was a real challenge to get in there, but we made it work, and I've been riding this bike around, so we know we've done the right thing and that it is actually working and rideable. I promise I'm almost done on the details on this bike, guys, but we have a lot to get through. Shortly, we'll be taking this thing out for a ride once I start it up so you can see this thing in action, but a couple more things, and I know this one is going to be a divisive one. Our tank shifter. So this always gets people revved up. They either love it or hate it. It's not the obvious choice for functionality, but in terms of keeping the handlebars clean on this bike and making something that I think is pretty badass, we put a hand shifter on it. So we have an inspection cap that we've modified here to swing the lever off. You've got your clutch handle here and your shifter there. So you shift forward into first, and then as you're riding, you shift back and slam it through the gears. It's ultra fun. There's a lot of novelty to riding this bike. Also a bit of an anti-theft device, because if you can figure out how to ride that before I catch you trying to steal this thing, good on you. But yeah, this thing, like hooting it down the road when you're slamming through those gears, it's super fun. It's obviously not ideal when you're in traffic or anything like that, but I don't think I'd be wanting to ride this as a daily anyway. This is a bit of a leisure cruiser for us. So the idea for this came from, again, like I have a couple of old vintage motorcycles that have hand shifters, and it's not ideal, but it is actually a really fun part of riding vintage motorcycles. Is you have all of these mechanisms that you have to control, and it sort of provides you a far more visceral ride feel, where you have to understand your bike and know how it works. It's not as user friendly, but it sort of makes you pay attention to your machine a lot more. I feel like I have a panhead that has a jockey shift on it with a foot clutch, and that really taught me a whole different way of riding. So I wanted to sort of try something new on this thing. I think it looks really great when you look at the side profile of this bike from this side. What you would normally consider the B side of a motorcycle has some great detailing on it that makes it quite interesting to look at. So we've shaped this up out of some tubing. You've got an internal clutch cable that runs here and then disappears over to the other side of the bike where the clutch pivot is. And then with all of that finished, one of the last pieces that we shaped out was the exhaust. So I wanted to create, again, something really simple that complemented the bike. We had a lot going on with this one, so you got to know where to pull yourself up. We've gone for a straight 2-into-2 exhaust system, 316 stainless, welded and polished to the 9s. And then on the end here, I've seen this sort of technique done before with conical mufflers, but never in sort of an oval way. So I wanted to try to create sort of like a fishtail on the back here, but keep the profile thin. So the pipe is the same width across as it is, but we've just cut and put like a slight sand bend in the top pipe and then plated that in with like a triangle piece that you could maybe notice there, and built in a muffler here. So this bike, I mean, the Royal Enfield Twins, a 270 firing pattern, they sound incredible if you open them up and put a nice set of mufflers on. So I knew that that sound was within this engine. I wanted to let that out and really do this thing justice. And you'll hear it in the ride footage and in our other videos when we're just sort of taking this thing out and really showing it off. This thing sounds absolutely magic. It's one of the better sounding bikes that we've ever built. So as always, one of the last parts of your project is the paint. I had this design sort of taking shape in my head probably from maybe a third or a halfway on this build. I wanted to really let our fabrication do the talking, so I didn't want to go with some insane paint job, but I also wanted to sort of leverage on that vintage styling. So you've seen this style on some of our other projects before, namely the Shannon CB550 project, where we've used pinstriping up against filigree, which is a detailing I really like, not something that you don't really see many other places either. So Justin from Pop Bang Classics knocked this one out of the park. He did have a bit of trouble getting all these details aligned and right, but he's done an absolutely stellar job. So we've just gone with a gloss black. We've used a red that was color matched to our cherry leather on the seat. Seats trimmed out by Timeless Auto Trim with some really nice Royal Enfield detailing too, so shout out to Jamo on that one. The rest of the detailing comes by way of some gold leaf that's been airbrushed to sort of give it a bit of depth in effect. We've kept the pinstriping reasonably minimal. You've got some filigree detailing on the rear fender there. Super nice, really subtle touch. Some filigree detailing on the tank with the gold leaf, and then also again on the girder fork. So just running down that front leg of the girder to give it a little bit of depth. So again, something to offset and bring out the brass detailing that we'd fabricated into those crossbars on the girder. The other detailing, well, pretty much the only other detailing, was the purpose-built Moto Delta. So our shop logo just sort of tucked away nicely there, but the namesake of this bike, as it was sort of coming together, I felt like, you know, we don't always name our projects, but this one needed a name. So we've named this project Project Delta. The Delta is the name of the symbol that we use for our shop logo. And if you don't know, or if you haven't been told by us before, you haven't seen it, a delta represents a value of change in an object. So in mathematical terms, that's just a little bit nerdy, but that's where it comes from. So the idea behind that is, you know, Project Delta is namely representing the change that we've created in this Super Meteor bike. So from where it started to where we are now. Obviously on the tank, we've gone with a heritage Royal Enfield logo, something really subtle as well. On bikes like this, I feel like branding, you know, it really needs its place. You've got to pull it back where you need to and just make it subtle. And then of course the purpose-built Moto signature, something that we put on only our top tier motorcycles. You can't pay for it, you can't decide if you're getting one or not. It's something that I decide throughout the process of the project. If everything's coming together and you know, I feel like this is sort of indicative of where we are in the pinnacle of our style and our skills at the time, it'll get emblazoned with the purpose-built Moto signature. I'm gonna shut up now, start this thing, and then we're gonna chuck a GoPro on, get the boys out with the cameras and show you this thing in action. Thanks for joining us and thanks for sticking with us if you got this far, guys. Make sure you go check out all the other videos on the Royal Enfield channels and also the PBM channels on this bike. There's a lot of detailing in it, running you through a bit of the build process and also a lot of the thought process and a little bit more about the artistry that goes into these bikes. You know, I like getting into the details and the nitty-gritty here, but there is a lot more that goes on in our minds when we're designing and sort of conceptualizing these bikes. So if you're into that sort of thing, make sure you go check it out. All right, let's hear this thing start up. Fuck, I love this thing.